Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Tucker-Simmons. I'm the principal lawyer and currently kind of the only lawyer at Avant Law. And I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Ottawa Law School. So before jumping into the talk, I wanted to do a little exercise in free association. I think it'll be fun, hopefully. Hopefully not too offensive to me. I'm going to ask you to I want you to freely associate whatever you think of whenever you think law, lawyer, law firm. Use whatever adjective, just shout it out, whatever adjective comes to mind, whatever descriptor, expletive. Money. Money's a good one. I like money. Suits. Expensive. That's a good one. I like expensive. These are awesome. These really strange English. Oh my God, you guys are good. Wow. Okay, that worked out really well. Thank you. I was not expecting anyone to say creativity or creative. Definitely. And I think there's a good reason for that. I noticed when I was articling, and my articling is when you kind of do your training, your initial training before you become a lawyer, that creativity was not a term that was typically associated with law firms. My articling firm was incredible. I have nothing bad to say, only good things to say about them. They gave me excellent training. But as I was articling, I noticed that I started thinking I wanted to do things a little bit differently. And so I got together with my former business partner, Miriam Martin, and we decided to start our own law firm. The law firm, there we go, sorry. That was supposed to, the law firm we started was Avant Law. Avant Law is supposed to be evocative of avant-garde. And what we were trying to do was we wanted to found a firm that valued creativity. So Avant Law was, a core value of Avant Law was going to be creativity. Not creativity for creativity's sake, but creativity so that our services could be within reach. And what I really mean is we wanted to be creative in the sense we wanted to be innovative. We wanted to be innovative about how we did business, about how we delivered services in order to reduce costs for our clients so that our services could be accessible to the broadest spectrum of people. We wanted to do that using technology. We wanted to do that by designing better business practices, systems. We also wanted to be more efficient in how we delivered legal services, and we wanted to cut out frills. We wanted to be a no-frills law firm. And I'll tell you, so now it's just been over 4 years, and the results have been a little bit mediocre. Actually, very, very mediocre. I chose that photo because I think it amply expresses my feelings about this. I am personally a little bit disappointed with how we've been able to do as a firm. We were able to get costs down. It's not to say that Miriam only left a few months ago, and she was a criminal lawyer. We both tried really hard, and I think we did achieve to a certain extent to get our fees down. We have below market fees. We have sliding scale fees. But we were never able to achieve the level of affordability that I had initially envisioned, that we'd wanted to achieve, and that's been a little bit disappointing for me. I'm telling you this story because it's symptomatic. What our inability to achieve our affordability objectives is symptomatic of a larger problem in law that in the legal sector. especially in Ontario, but really it spans Canada and many countries. There's a crisis of affordability in legal services, and not a lot of people outside the legal sector are aware of this. We call it the access to justice crisis. Yeah, that's what, yeah. So there's a lot of ways to achieve justice. This is one way, and I'm very supportive of this method of achieving justice. The access to justice crisis that I'm talking about really is mostly centered around the fact that lawyers are too expensive, like we were saying earlier. Lawyers like money too much. And the problem is, well, that problem, the access to justice crisis manifests in many ways. It's been, so the legal system was never designed to be accessible. I don't want to, there was never a golden era of legal services, and it's just that in recent times, more of us are seeing that as a problem. And the access to justice crisis manifests in different ways. One concrete example to give you a sense of what it means. About 20 years ago, only 5% of parties that appeared in court were unrepresented. Only 5% were unrepresented, self-represented. Now that number has ballooned to up to 80%, depending on the court or administrative tribunal that you're talking about. So what that means is you have more and more people that are appearing before courts and tribunals representing themselves. So for example, in family law, about 50% of parties that appear in family court are self-represented. And I'll tell you from personal experience, having gone up against self-reps, they tend to do a very poor job. It's not their fault. I mean, you think about it, we all went through years of training, years of school training in order to be able to give legal advice, to provide legal services. There's just no way for someone to learn it on the fly. And so what I want you to, what people often don't understand about this is that what this really actually means, what this really implies, and this is very important. If your rights are violated, and you can't afford to enforce those rights because you can't afford a lawyer, you don't have those rights, right? So it really means that you do not have rights that you cannot afford to enforce. So I'll give you a few examples. A typical sexual harassment case, if it's a sexual harassment case at work, or sexual harassment by a landlord or something like that, it costs about, I'd say about a minimum of $5,000 to be able to draft the application and bring that through at least part way. But that cost can go up to $10,000 very quickly. That's very expensive. And I'll give you an example. Your manager comes up to you at work, rubs your arm a little bit, and winks at you in a flirtatious way. You make a sexual harassment complaint. All you're trying to do is you just don't want this creeper to do it again, and then you get fired. You come see me, and I have to tell you, there's a good chance that a case like that is only worth about $10,000 to bring that case. And so I have to say, you know what, it's probably not a financially viable case. Those cases don't settle quickly. Sexual harassment cases do not settle fast. No one admits to sexual harassment. And so you're looking at spending $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees in order to get an award of $5,000 to $10,000. And you don't get, at the Human Rights Tribunal, you don't get an award of legal fees. So the other party's not going to pay your legal fees at the end. Another example. How many people have left a Google review before? How many of you have left a negative Google review? Be very careful, okay? You're seeing this more and more. I've started to see it in my practice. Very unscrupulous employers, they protect their reputation very zealously online, and they will send you a cease and desist letter to remove a Google review. And they'll escalate if you ignore it. There's a case I know of very recently, negative Google review, someone's being sued for $5 million, a completely frivolous lawsuit, but, or at least the amount that's being demanded is exaggerated, but it costs to defend a case like that, it costs between $25,000 and $50,000, right? A defamation suit. So that person's freedom of, in order for that person to express themselves, to use freedom of expression, it's going to cost $25,000 to $50,000. And the same thing applies, a lot of you, I'm sure many of you have heard of Twitter. If you and have engaged in a public political debate, you criticize the wrong person, and we're seeing this more and more as well. You criticize the wrong person on Twitter, you're getting a cease and desist letter, you're getting sued for defamation. It's going to cost you $25,000 to $50,000. That's a very expensive principle. Most people just back off, and withdraw the tweet, regardless of the content. So the point is, you do not have a right to be free from sexual harassment at work if you cannot afford it. Right? You do not have freedom of expression if you cannot afford it. And that's a problem, and that's a big problem. So it's true, so the most legal issues are experienced by people in the low income brackets. If you're charged criminally, maybe you go to jail, you can't work, waiting bail, you can't work, you can't pay your rent, so now you're being evicted, and then there's so the legal issues tend to cascade and cluster around the lower income brackets. But the examples I gave you, they happen to everyone. This really does affect everyone. And also the other issue here is low income people, legal issues tend to be experienced more by women, people with disabilities, like equity-seeking groups, people of color. Immigrants experience more legal issues than other people, and they're less able to pay for them because they're in lower income brackets. So what I want you to know, so the fundamental cause of the access to justice crisis is inequality. It's not, and that's a larger social issue that lawyers are not going to be able to resolve themselves, obviously. We need to address that issue as a society. But I think creativity can go a long way towards alleviating that, the access to justice crisis and the problem with affordability. So I'm going to ask you guys, if anyone can help me out here. This might not work, this one. But I have a backup plan. Can someone tell me what their workplace does or what you do personally in order to promote creativity, to foster creativity at your work, in your own home? Does anyone? Safety. Yeah, okay. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Safe. You need a safe working environment, low stress. Yeah, a safe open space. Open workspaces, yeah. Setting intentions. Oh, cool. No judgment. Oh, man, that's so good. This worked out so well. Okay, so the problem is, so there's a big problem. We don't do any of that in law. Our workplaces tend not to be safe. They're extremely stressful, not open workspaces, typically. Tons of judgment, nothing but judgment. And genuinely, I mean, like, it's not that we didn't start out creative. Many of us studied creative subjects, disciplines. There are many lawyers that were artists, still are artists, doing dance. They express their creativity in other ways, definitely not in law. But we really do suffer from a deficit of creativity in law. I call it the creativity deficit. And there are real reasons for this. I've identified 4 of them for us. The first reason is that, so basically creativity is conditioned out of us. Law school and especially the practice of law condition us out of creativity, out of thinking creatively. We don't, and the first impediment to creativity in legal practice is that we're conditioned to be extremely risk averse. And in order to be creative, you have to be able to take risks. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to be able to take risks, fail, try again, and do that repeatedly. That's how creativity works, right? And then you can't be extremely risky. Those 2 things are antithetical. Another impediment is that, and related to that, because we're so risk averse, we often are looking backwards we're looking at what worked, and we're redoing that constantly. We're not trying to come up with new creative ways of doing things. And in some ways, some examples of the things that lawyers still do are astounding. You know, I swear we're the only profession that still uses a fax. Yeah, I had to use a fax. I'm like, can't you just email me? You know, like you'll get like, dear Mr. Tucker-Simmons, enclosed in this fax. I'm like, you know. And then I do that, right? Like as I was saying before, as time went on, our firm, one of the reasons we couldn't do better is because we had to start looking like more of a traditional law firm. And I have a fax number, actually. You can fax me. Okay, so so related to that, lawyers are extremely anxious, and like, you know, we were pointing out, like you need, our practice is extremely stressful. There's so much on the line all the time, and you don't want to make a mistake, because lawyers get sued too, and we don't like no one likes getting sued, so our workplaces are not conducive to creativity, because anxiety causes adrenaline, cortisol release, and those are anti-creative agents. They are anti-creative hormones. And the last impediment I wanted to tell you about is just debt. Law students, you can't be innovative. You can't go out and start your own innovative law firm when you're saddled with debt. When you graduate from law school, you're inevitably saddled with too much debt, and so you have to just go find a job. And you don't have that space to be creative. So those are the barriers, and I wanted to give you this. So there's lots of room for innovation in law. We could all just one thing stop using a fax. Here's an example that I give you. There's other ways that we can be accessible, that not just about reducing fees, but also being more comprehensible, right? Like speaking plain English. So the first release is a traditional release, just using what worked. The one on the bottom is something that I designed. I was so upset. I was like, why do we keep doing this to ourselves, to our clients? This is really what this means is you can't sue me anymore. I just summarized the entire first paragraph. You can't sue me anymore, as what a release says. And then so in the other paragraph, I've said, look, if you sign this document, you're agreeing that you won't start a lawsuit. That's what that means. So there's the problem with lawyers not being creative is that lawyers exercise almost absolute dominion over the legal profession, or over the legal sector. So not only a lot of people don't realize this, only lawyers can own law firms. You don't have law firms on the TSX because lay people cannot invest in law firms. The Law Society of Ontario, which is our governing body, is an elected body. only lawyers can be elected to the Law Society, and only lawyers can vote. And this is problematic because you have way too many people who really struggle with creativity deciding all aspects of the legal system. They're deciding what services are offered, how much they're offered for, how they're offered, and then how the legal system as a whole is structured. And it's all governed by lawyers. And we're not, and it's governed by people so as a profession, we're having a very hard time thinking creatively about how to be more user-friendly, how to be more affordable. That's not to say that there's not innovation happening. There are some really cool, creative people thinking about how to reduce the cost of legal services. There's a great legal services company based out of Toronto called Blue Jay Legal. They're using artificial intelligence to automate certain complex analytical processes in law. One of their functions that they offer is their AI will predict a severance package, which can be easy, but in many circumstances, predicting a severance is actually a complex analytical task. This task used to take a lawyer about 2 hours to 3 hours. That's now reduced to about 10 minutes, just the time it takes to input the data. That's a savings of between $500 and $800, right? And that can be passed on to the client. So AI, there's a lot of promise for AI. Another exciting innovation is legal expense insurance. Just like you can buy car insurance for car accidents, you can buy legal expense insurance now in Canada for legal accidents. So if you get into a legal accident, you can call your insurer, they'll give you legal advice and potentially pay your legal fees if necessary. The problem is the innovation that's happening is too focused on lucrative areas. So it's mostly in the business sector, it's mostly in the corporate commercial area, real estate. There's nothing happening in the areas that really, or very little happening in the areas that affect people. Nothing in landlord-tenant, very little in employment law, and only because employers have money, not for employees. Nothing in very little in human rights, very little in civil liberties. So we need more innovation in those areas, and this is how I think we're going to solve it. We have to shake up the system. We need non-lawyers investing in law firms. The problem with lawyer ownership is that it significantly restricts the amount of capital available for investment, right? And so and that restriction means that there's not enough investment capital for research and development and innovation. And the people that have it, the large firms with billion-dollar revenue streams, don't really care to innovate that much. They're much more interested in protecting what they have than opening up. So we need that investment, and we need those expertise. We need those expertise. The other thing that I think the profession needs to do is we need to engage non-lawyers. We need to engage stakeholders in the system, and we need to do that in order to leverage those expertise, to leverage that creative thinking power, because we're not doing a good job on our own. And that's a good segue to what you guys can do. We're at a very embryonic stage. I wish I could tell you there was this great movement. There are a few people, most of them are academics, thinking about this within the legal sector. There's virtually no one outside of the legal sector thinking about this. So the first step is I just want you guys to be aware of the problem, that there is an access to justice crisis and that it is going on. The second thing I think you can do is I think you can actually engage in the public debate, and there's even something you could do today. I want you to challenge the Law Society. I want you to criticize the Law Society. Ask it what it's done to increase access to justice, and ask it why it's failing at increasing access to justice. You can actually do that directly. The Law Society has a Twitter handle. And don't be worried about what I said earlier about the cease and desist. I know it's a loss. I know it's the Law Society, but I think it would look really bad for them to do that. And come see me if you do get a cease and desist letter. Because if we don't, and so this is important. We do need to start moving on this, because if we don't do better, what's going to happen? Well, the underlying causes of the access to justice crisis is inequality. Creativity can help alleviate that. And if we don't start thinking creatively about how to deliver legal services, if we don't imbue the legal sector with more creative thinking, we won't get costs down, and we have to get costs down. We can get costs down, we have to get costs down, because if we don't, fewer and fewer of us will have rights, because we cannot afford to enforce them. Thank you.
So let's get Marwan a morning workout, and just throw your hand up and he'll come around with the mic.
Hi there, I'm Jen.
Hi.
That was very inspiring, very exciting. And I'm curious how you've obviously invested a lot of personal leadership and life energy into this. And I'm curious, ultimately, what is your aspiration here? Where do you want to see, in your lifetime, where do you want to see this go? Why are you mobilizing us? And the second question is, I worked with leaders, so I'm the vision of the loss. My husband's a lawyer, all my best friends are lawyers. I'm that's a thing. I sent him a tweet already saying you got to connect with this guy. Well, it's actually a text, not a tweet. But I'm curious, with the Law Society, their mission, they say protecting the public. Mm-hmm. So I'm but actually, it's more effective if we go online and go at them in a way that's constructive, creative, rather than. So what do you recommend there? Any thoughts?
That's a great question. So yeah, the vision, the long-term vision really is, I would love to be able to have someone come into my office and sit down and say, I got sexually harassed at work, and I can say, yeah, your case is only worth $10,000, but we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. We can make sure that you get your job, you get to keep your job, and I'd like lawyers to be much more accessible and affordable. And I think so that the Law Society really, the problem is, we're all kind of complicit in this because it's a little bit insular, and it's not. It does try to engage the public to a certain extent, but it's still. It's just there's so much inertia, and so I think asking it what it's doing to increase access to justice and engaging and really sparking a political debate. I think if you what do you call that, tweet at use the handle, or you tweet at Joel Harden or your local MPP and get them thinking about it as well, because the Law Society is most people don't even know what it is, to be honest, and so it's kind of in the shadows, and we want to bring it out and we want it to engage. They do genuinely care. It's not that they don't care about access to justice. I just think they're just we're kind of set in our ways, and they need to be challenged. Yeah.
My question is about tenants' rights, and I'm wondering what you think about landlord licensing. I'm bringing it up because the City of Ottawa has done a study, and anybody can go online to the cityofottawa.ca, I guess it is, and up till September 4th, and say whether you like landlord licensing or not. I've done some work probably about 2-3 years ago on this whole issue and on low-income renters. And what these poor buggers are going through, you wouldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. We have 32,000 people in Ottawa community housing who've got bed bugs, cockroaches, and now rats. And nobody seems to really care, because I lobbied city politicians quite a bit. Anyway, to make a long story short, I think landlord licensing is effective. They're doing it in Toronto, but what do you think? Because I see that's one of your specialties. Yeah,
I do work in housing rights, and I'm definitely in favor of landlord licensing, and it is a way to, that is cheap, effective way to increase access to justice, because you'd have a more proactive, there'd be a more proactive role for the regulator in preventing landlord abuses, and it wouldn't fall to the individual tenants. So it is an access to justice issue in the sense that it would help even the imbalance of power between the landlord and the tenant, and make it easier for tenants to enforce their rights. And so I think that's a great, I really am very much in favor of landlord licensing.
Hi, my name's Jay, and thank you very much. That was really interesting. It's on. I have a question. Like, law is very much a language, and you talked a lot about, well, a bit about some initiatives, for example, the AI one in Toronto, about making law more accessible, the actual language. I'm just wondering what other avenues you see there, like in particular in the human-related cases, the ones you mentioned, like sexual harassment and defamation. Those are complex analytical processes, requiring case law and so on, and doctrine. So do you see a way to simplify that so that those having to defend themselves can defend themselves better?
That's a really great question. I'm glad you asked that. I think right now there's virtually nothing happening, except there's a little bit of human rights work that company Blue Jay Legal, but has some human rights analytical functions. It's very cool. The artificial intelligence can actually read and understand cases, as far as AI can understand anything, I guess. But and then predict outcomes. So far, the functions are a little bit simple, but they're limited. The only reason it's happening in human rights is because human rights issues come up in employment law, and employers have lots of money, so it is still like employment law is a lucrative area. Employees benefit from that innovation indirectly because employees are also affected, but you're not going to see things like that, and you haven't been seeing things like that really in landlord-tenant or civil liberties or anything like that. I think the only way to do that is if you open up non-lawyer investment, then you open up a lot of resources for investment capital. That capital is not going to go to those areas unless you force it. So I think there would have to be some mechanism for ensuring that a proportion of investment, if you're going to be investing as a non-lawyer in a law firm, a portion of that investment must go either into some R&D pot specifically for non-lucrative, low-income access to justice areas, or you force those firms to actually subsidize non-lucrative services. As a result, there has to be some regulatory mechanism. Ideally, there's a public solution and lots of public investment in research and innovation, but I don't see that happening under this administration.
Oh, hello. Hi, Dan. That was fantastic. Thank you. Also, in different parts of the world, like in the States, there are programs that are, I think, not exactly pushed by legal scholars or lawyers. They have, for instance, on Mother's Day, there's a fund you can donate to and bail out mothers who are incarcerated and that kind of thing. Well, not incarcerated, I don't know the language around it. But I'm wondering if there are systems set up like that in Ontario, in Ottawa, in Canada, where folks like us who maybe can't invest in event law or any kind of law firm or that kind of thing to support the process of making justice more accessible.
Yeah, that's a great question. There is, I haven't seen too many, but there are, for example, in Herongate right now, I'm somewhat involved in this, but the Herongate Tenant Coalition is trying to start what they call a community justice center, which will offer a mix of legal, quasi-legal, and justice-oriented services, also of space for people. There are more and more initiatives that are happening. The problem is, with wherever the reason they're happening is because government is withdrawing from legal services. That's with the legal aid cuts, an enormous amount of money was cut, and so the private citizens are stepping up and trying to finance this, but it's just not as you can't do it on the scale with donations that you would that you'd be able to do it if you had genuine investment, either from government or large businesses with lots of capital. But there are, I know that Heron Gate Community Justice Center is one example. I don't know of others, but they are starting to pop up here and there.
So we have time for one more question after this one.
Hi, my name is Mara. Thank you for your presentation. It was very inspiring to hear that lawyers, especially the ones that focus on addressing human rights violations, are working to make the legal system more accessible. My question is related to what can we do, you as lawyers and we as members of the society, to address discrepancies between the different legal systems of different provinces. My question comes from a case of a friend of mine that was arrested in Quebec while being in an abused mother's shelter in Ontario. So that's why I'm asking. There are discrepancies. What can we do to address them? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually that's a very tough thing to do, because you'd have to just rewrite the Constitution. and yeah, I'll just tell it to you straight. You know, it is a problem, and there are reasons for that were now, that were negotiated 150 years ago, and we're now stuck with their decisions. The Constitution is actually kind of funny. If you ever get a chance to the 1867 version, take a look at it. There's some funny provisions in there, and not all of them make very much sense. But that's the only. I mean, and then it's also a political issue. What province is going to give up its power?
Oh, hi, I'm Sandra. I am a lawyer also, and so I found your presentation very interesting, and I certainly appreciate the perspective you bring to the table and engaging everyone in this very important discussion. In terms of what we can do, Law Society is very much a governing body, so it basically, I guess, tries to control our behavior as lawyers to make sure we don't defraud clients, etc. But if you're looking for advocacy on access to justice systems, you may be better served in terms of members of this group to contact the Canadian Bar Association, the Ontario Bar Association. Those are the advocacy organizations as well that I think are very much worth mentioning. When one looks at the internal operations of law firms, etc., I mean, I think it's fantastic. This idea of self-reflection is very important. I do want to say, and I feel like I need to, I don't know why it's a lawyer thing in me, that there are a lot of creative lawyers out there. I'd like to think I'm one of them. And so I think sometimes it's our experience based. People need to absolutely think differently. And I work for a public service union, so I actually feel like you've made a case for why you should be joining a union. If you can't pay, you can't have no rights. If you are paying dues, you have similar rights because you're at a more accessible, more affordable. It's like having insurance, actually. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'd certainly be interested to see where this takes us. And I'll just say one more thing: we cannot, so as much in favor as I am of AI and advancement of that sort of thing, we cannot dehumanize. We have to be really, really careful about dehumanizing the value that a lot of lawyers, and I see it too, I help a lot of members, they have human problems. They do need a human touch. They need a lot of compassion and understanding and support. That's not something you're going to get from AI, regrettably. So
Yeah.
there needs to be some balance.
No, yeah, those are very valid points. Yeah, the Canadian Bar Association, Ontario Bar Association, they're all involved, and they all are concerned about access to justice. I think the part of the issue with all of the bodies, including the regulatory bodies, is that their constituency is just lawyers, and so they're only directly responsible to lawyers. They will respond to public criticism, but only substantial public criticism. And so I'm hoping that, you know, at some point in the near future we can get something like that started. Yeah. Great. Okay. Thanks.